So in my last video, I spent a good chunk of time ranting about how much Gen 6 was constantly referencing back to Gen 1. It absolutely annoyed me how you could barely go anywhere or make any significant story progress without running into some form of Gen 1 callback. It completely shattered the immersion for me because all it made me think of was the developers trying to forcefully cram in references to appeal to the Gen 1ers. That got me thinking though, would people think that I hate nostalgic throwbacks and that I think nostalgia is a terrible thing to experience? The answer would be no, not at all. I absolutely love nostalgia. It really brings me back to a simpler time when I didn't have so many responsibilities. And you know what? I'm sure the Gen 1ers who played Gen 6 absolutely love the nostalgic throwbacks. I can't blame them. I too have my fair share of things in video games that make me feel nostalgic. So what's the problem with Gen 6 having so many Gen 1 references? Sure, it may not work for me, but it's completely harmless to someone who loves the callbacks, right? Well, here's the thing. You can have nostalgic callbacks without them being immersion-shattering things that make no sense in the confines of the game universe. Nostalgia is a unique feeling that needs to be treated carefully or else it loses its impact. For example, as a kid, I had a PS2, and my 3 favorite games on the thing were LEGO Star Wars, LEGO Star Wars 2, and SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom. I had an absolute blast playing those games as a kid. Later on though, I got more consoles, and my interest in my PS2 faded fast. It's been nearly a decade and now I'm a college student. I was feeling nostalgic a few months ago and decided to turn the dusty old thing on and play those 3 games. The first time I turned the thing on in ages, I got the biggest nostalgia wave in my life as I heard that unnecessarily edgy startup sequence from my childhood. But then I played it more. I still felt nostalgic for the startup sound, but significantly less so since it lost its initial impact. Then I played more and more. Soon enough, I completely lost that nostalgic feeling altogether because that sound was no longer exclusive to my childhood. It had now ingrained itself into my college lifetime too. And that's the same thing when it comes to nostalgic throwbacks. When they're expected, they're no longer nostalgic, but they're mandatory. Game Freak isn't the only culprit for mishandling nostalgia though. Now the biggest culprit for nostalgia pandering is Sega and Sonic the Hedgehog. So here's the story. Sega had some issues with making Sonic games far too experimental and they lost several fans in the process. Then this little gem of a game came along called Sonic Generations, my personal favorite game of all time. Sonic Generations' main gimmick was that Eggman was messing with time travel, and every single level in the game was a remix of a past level from a past game. Also Classic Sonic from the Genesis came along for the ride too. It was an amazing experience with the most solid gameplay and greatest level design in the entire series, and that's what made it great. Sega marketed it as the ultimate celebration of Sonic's history, which, while true, was not the main thing that made it great. Sega misinterpreted the fans' critical acclaim to the game and thought the only reason they loved it was because 99% of the game was nostalgia. This led to Sega slowly but surely pulling Sonic farther and farther back into the past with nostalgic throwback after nostalgic throwback after nostalgic throwback. First came Sonic Lost World, which brought back the art style and many of the enemies straight from the Genesis games. Also, modern Sonic was redesigned slightly to more resemble classic Sonic. Then came a bunch of merchandise which featured none other than classic Sonic, and only classic Sonic. Modern was nowhere to be seen. Then came the next main series games, Mania and Forces. Mania was a true return back to the Genesis gameplay, and while a masterpiece, it was mostly zones recycled from the Genesis games as ordered by Takashi Iizuka, the head of Sonic Team. Despite this, it was still the most critically acclaimed Sonic game since Sonic Adventure 2. Then Sonic Forces came around and it was modern Sonic's turn to shine. And guess who was back? None other than Classic Sonic. What are you doing here? This is Modern's time in the spotlight. You already got your game. Give Modern a chance to be on his own. Forces had incredibly mediocre level design and incredibly wonky physics, which led to it being completely panned by fans. The problem is that this makes it look like Classic Sonic is the only true experience that fans will love, which makes me fear the worst for modern Sonic. Also, Forces had 9 different Green Hill acts, including DLC. Like, what?! Green Hill, for those of you who don't know, was the first level in the first Sonic game. In recent years, starting around the time of Sonic Generations, Green Hill has been remixed and remade over and over again. Remember how I lost the initial nostalgia of the PS2 startup sound? That's what happened to the entire Sonic fanbase and Green Hill Zone. You see why I say Sega's the worst culprit when it comes to nostalgia being handled completely wrong? Okay, so how about an example of nostalgia being used right in a video game? Super Mario Odyssey's 8-bit sections. Nobody saw them coming, and everyone, as far as I know, loved them. And the thing is that they weren't the entire gimmick of Super Mario Odyssey. They were just a fun little thing to do on the side that was mostly optional. You see, that's how you do nostalgia right. Out of nowhere and integrated seamlessly with the option to not do it if you don't want to, is the perfect way to do nostalgia. The other thing to consider about nostalgia is the fact that it completely varies from player to player. I absolutely hate it when modern Pokemon references Gen 1, as I made perfectly clear in my Gen 6 rant, but when it references the other games in their regions, I'm all for it. For example, I was playing Sun a few months ago, when all of a sudden, Rotom Dex suddenly references the Johto region out of nowhere! I was baffled and shocked and excited all at once. Finally, my home region was getting at least a tiny bit of acknowledgement after being hidden under Kanto's shadow for years. Most players, though, would most likely see the reference and think, oh yeah, Johto, that's a region that exists, and not give it a second thought. It completely varies from person to person, and it's nearly impossible to pander to everyone. The weird thing about nostalgic callbacks is that if it's done wrong, it can almost seem like the developer is saying, hey player, look how cool we used to be, remember? How about you keep playing the game and act like we're still that cool, aight? Sega, I'm looking at you. In those cases, it seems like the developer is getting desperate and pandering to your past. Oh, I almost forgot to mention games that are meant to enhance your nostalgic feels by giving them a fresh coat of paint. Specifically remasters. Remakes can do it too, like Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Omega Ruby, and Alpha Sapphire, all of which both enhance the source material and added more to do, but that's not what I mean by remasters. The difference between remakes and remasters is that remakes add a bunch of new stuff to enhance the original experience, but remasters are games that stay one-to-one true to the source and just give it a fresh coat of paint like Crash N. Sane and Spyro Reignited. I personally don't know how to feel about games like that. On one hand, it seems like a corporate cash grab that relies 100% on nostalgia, but on the other hand, it can also be made from a desire to enhance one's childhood and give modern gamers the same experience. I don't know. Since I'm just so perfect with segues, now seems like the perfect time to talk about my personal experiences with nostalgia. Story time! So for the longest time, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom was just sitting on my shelf waiting to be played. All that time I thought, nah, I don't want to play it, I'm going to wait until I have a Let's Play channel and go in completely blind. I, of course, never made myself a Let's Play channel, thank goodness, and during my first college semester I thought, yeah, that's never gonna happen, I'm just gonna play it for nostalgia's sake. And play it I did! I had an absolute nostalgia waterfall as I played through the game from start to finish. I didn't remember any of the level layouts, which practically made it a brand new experience, but somehow I managed to remember every note to every song. As I played, I found myself humming along without realizing it, and when I did realize, I was like, oh wow, I actually remember this song. Cool. Also as a kid, I was both too scared and too unskilled to fight the bosses, so I always had my sister fight them for me. Now I was able to beat them with little to no problem. I even beat the final boss, something that not even my sister could do back in the day. I felt so accomplished that day as I finally finished what I failed to do as a kid. So Minecraft is a game that exists. Back in middle school, and I think maybe the first year of high school too, so I estimate around 2012 to 2014, Minecraft on the Xbox 360 was my absolute favorite game. Back then, I spent literally all of my free time in that blocky world. During all that time, the incredibly relaxing, mysterious, and adventurous soundtrack accompanied me every step of the way. Eventually, of course, my interest in the game waned over time as I gained more and more responsibilities. I never actually stopped playing though. I still play it at least once a month nowadays, and every time I do, I get taken right back to those relaxing times of middle school. I owe a good chunk of that feeling to the fact that the 360 version still plays the same songs from my childhood 99% of the time, making it feel like the exact same game despite what others think through all the updates. I play in a different world now than back then, but I still somehow get the same experience of wonder and adventure as I play. Heck, sometimes I listen to the beautiful Alpha soundtrack through YouTube, and while it doesn't feel as nostalgic as when I hear it while I play, it is still incredibly relaxing. On that video, I even left a really heartfelt comment about nostalgia and how Minecraft isn't ruined. This is what I said. To all the people complaining about new Minecraft, yeah, okay, it's overrun with cringy kids. So what? It's a kid's game. It's always been overrun with cringy kids. You know why? It's because we were those cringy kids at one point. Now we've grown up. We look back on this soundtrack for the nostalgia of when we were those kids, yet we complain about the kids there are nowadays. Just think about it. Soon those kids will grow up too, and if Minecraft is still as strong as ever then, then they will most likely be complaining about the cringy kids in that time. The cycle will continue. Just enjoy the nostalgic music you came to hear and remember your long hours passed as a kid playing this game. In regards to the newer soundtrack, so what? Sure, the new songs will never be as good as these classics, but they're still decent. Enjoy what you're listening to here and now. Forget the newer songs, and remember these beautiful, older, and more nostalgic songs. In regards to the new blocks, so what? The game doesn't force you to use them. You can completely ignore them and act like you're still playing the older Minecraft from your childhood. And if that doesn't work for you, you can always revert the version back to your favorite, unless you're on console. Sorry. In conclusion, stop complaining about the new. Enjoy what you came to this video to enjoy. The old stuff. Sit back, relax, and remember the good old days. Sincerely, a 2012 to 2014 Xbox 360 version player. Yes, it's both corny and cheesy, but those are my thoughts on nostalgia with Minecraft. Nostalgia also plays a big part in my love for two of my three favorite Sonic games. They were the first two Sonic games I ever played, and I still play them to this day. Those two games are Sonic Generations at number 1 and Sonic 06 at number 3. Believe it or not, I actually love Sonic 06. It was the first Sonic game I ever played once I joined the fanbase. I still play it to this day. And before you hate me, I'm going to declare right now that nostalgia is a huge driving force in the love of the Sonic Adventure games. Therefore, you can't claim that my subjective opinion that's heavily based on nostalgia is wrong. Anyway, then there's Sonic Generations. It was the first Sonic game I ever owned, and I still play it to this day, constantly trying to top my best times, scores, and ring counts. I've played the game to death, so it no longer appeals nostalgically to me, but it does appeal to me in regards to its solid gameplay. Also, interestingly, as I said, it was the first Sonic game I ever owned, and back then I had no idea all the levels were remakes until later. So really the nostalgia for me was going back to the older games and seeing the originals. Nostalgia is also the very reason Pokemon Soul Silver is my favorite Pokemon game. Seriously, if it weren't for the fact that it was my first, Omega Ruby would be my favorite. I just feel that Soul Silver was a perfect first introduction to the series, what with the buddy mechanic and all. Heck, as you've probably figured out by now, nostalgia is the reason Cyndaquil is my favorite starter, Ampharos is my favorite electric type, Lugia is my favorite legendary, and Typhlosion is my favorite Pokemon, and Cyndaquil is my mascot. It's all because they remind me of when I was introduced to, and had my first adventure in, that amazing fantasy world. In conclusion, there is absolutely nothing wrong with nostalgia in video games. In many cases, it can even enhance a player's experience by making them feel like a carefree kid again. That being said, it does need to be treated carefully. Too much nostalgia can and will completely give the opposite effect of what it's trying to accomplish, as seen with the corner that Sega and Sonic Team have painted themselves into. If it's done right, then I'm totally okay with nostalgic throwbacks. But what is right when it comes to nostalgia is going to be different depending on who you ask. Nostalgia isn't simply a thing that you can flip a switch and say, oh yeah, it's completely okay to put a nostalgic throwback into this game. Instead, you need to evaluate your audience and see if they would be okay with a nostalgic throwback or Easter egg. If they only play for nostalgia like most Pokemon fans, then go for it. As long as it's believable in the context of the universe and doesn't scare away casuals like me and Gen 6. If the fanbase is absolutely sick of nostalgic throwbacks like the Sonic fanbase, then don't do it at all. For a final conclusion, I'll say that whether or not nostalgia is good depends on the audience. They are the ones receiving the callbacks after all. P.S. I think we can all agree that the time Brock and Misty came back in the anime was an absolute masterpiece of an episode with the semi-subpar Sun and Moon series. It may have been 100% nostalgia, but it was totally worth it as it shows Ash's original companions do in fact still exist.